Internet, Seth Skorkowski, and today we'll be discussing the Call of Cthulhu scenario, Armored Angels, written by Gustav Bjorkston and published in 1992's Fearful Passages. Coming in at just 15 pages, the scenario is playable in just a single session. It offers us some international adventure by taking us to an archaeological dig site in Iraq. It also features several Mythos creatures and a lot of combat. So much action that I really wouldn't recommend this scenario for regular Call of Cthulhu investigators. However, this game is perfect for Pulp Cthulhu players, which is what we did when we ran it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to offer my criticisms, my tips, my suggestions as a game master who has successfully run this scenario.
And I'm Jack the NPC. I'm going to give this one to you from a player's side of things, and trust me, this adventure was a blast.
But before we can go any further, I must warn you that there will be spoilers. So any players in the audience, if you ever want to experience this scenario, please stop here. But definitely send your game master to see about running Armored Angels for you. Okay, keepers, let's get to work. The scenario opens with the Royal Air Force officer arriving at the investigator's door to deliver a letter from Lawrence Powell, who's working at an archaeological dig in Iraq. Powell asks for the investigator's assistance, and if they accept the offer, then they're going to be quickly escorted to an airstrip and then flown directly to the dig site.
So the British military wants me to help with something concerning old ones and outer gods at an Iraqi dig site? Hell yes! Hold on, guys. Let me change it to something a little bit more appropriate. Okay, boys, let's go make some archaeology.
Now, it might seem a little bit weird if the PCs are being contacted by the RAF for help, especially if the PCs aren't British. If they're living in Arkham or somewhere else, it might seem a little bit strange that the British military is asking for their assistance here. However, the scenario does offer a pretty good reason for that, and that's that the player character's reputation has preceded them as far as being experts in, different Mythos-related things. However, this also means that your player characters should be experienced player characters, so this is definitely not something you'd really want to do for brand new investigators, but some investigators that have been around the block a few times have developed that bit of a reputation. However, for our campaign, it made a lot more sense for us because of some specific adventures that I had run before. So real quick, just because I've had a lot of viewers ask me how I go about stringing together different scenarios, it's kind of a single cohesive campaign, so this is how we did it. Our heroes are based out of Arkham and have several ties to Miskatonic University's archaeology department. Some years ago, they were contacted by the British Museum to help orchestrate a deal between Miskatonic and the British Museum about loaning the museum some Roman statues that they were going to use in exhibit. And this led us to the Madness in London Town adventure. Later, they then returned to London to assist that same exhibit in getting transported back to Arkham to begin its US tour, and that led them to Bad Moon Rising, where they did a job for the Royal Navy. And then most recently, they were contacted by the British Museum about tracking down a brass bowl that was stolen and auctioned off in New York. This led them to a very heavily modified version of Crash Dive, where they also encountered a cultist PC from the Madness in London Town adventure. Now, keepers, you don't need to use any of those previous adventures if you don't want to, but that's how we did it in order to create more of a cohesive story, and why it made a lot more sense when the Royal Air Force asked the PCs for help. After a very long journey, the player characters are going to arrive in Iraq, and we get this map, which is very hard to read, and they're going to land at the airbase in Kirkuk. They're going to meet the squadron commander, who's going to share that he isn't completely sure why the player characters are even there, only that Professor Powell, the head of the dig, wanted them there. However, Powell and the rest of his team are a few days late in returning from the dig site, and the commander has sent some reconnaissance planes to go and look for them, and those planes should be back at some point before nightfall.
This section should be a great opportunity for your player characters to glean a little bit of information about Professor Powell. Who is he? What's he like? What's he doing here in Iraq? But nah, the commander's all like, don't worry about it. Go on and shower up and we'll call you when the planes return.
The module sort of breezes past this section, in which the player characters are definitely going to want to ask a lot of questions, and the commander does have a lot of information that he's going to be giving to the player characters, but all that information appears in the later section, and none of that information appears here, and it's not going to be until after the plane returns that the module gives all that information to give to the PCs. However, keepers, I suggest suggest that you do share more here, especially if the players are wanting to roleplay all this out. Have the commander start opening up and giving a little bit more information to the PCs as they're talking with them over tea or over drinks or anything like that. And have them share stuff like, Pal's begun acting a little bit stranger and stranger the past few months. First, he was asking for live animals to be sent to the dig site. And then he asked for several fully grown large trees with complete root systems sent to the dig site. And then after that, he started asking for a lot of the artifacts that they had already sent back to the British Museum to then be sent back to Iraq so we could look at them again.
So Pal dug up a bunch of artifacts in Iraq and sent them back to England. And then he had England send them back to Iraq for further study? Yeah, that is weird. Kind of the total opposite of Hobby Lobby.
Once the planes do return that evening, they're going to report several strange things that they encountered at the dig site, one of which being some sort of giant fly thing that attacked their plane, as well as being fired upon by several machine gun emplacements that are around the dig site. Photographs they took show 3 gun emplacements, though the pilots never saw anybody operating the machine guns. I really wish the module had given us some sort of map that didn't show the interior portion of the temple, something that we could give them as a handout. So Keepers, I strongly suggest that you give them some sort of map that the players can look at. Point to the different portions on it. Name all the entrenchments, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. Let them see this site as if they were aerial photographs in order for the players to make their plans as if there was some sort of military campaign. At this point, the commander is going to share all that information that he knows about Pal. That way the player characters know what's going on. He's also going to give him a key to Pal's hut. That way the investigators can go in there and search around, hopefully glean a little bit of information about what's going on in order to assist the Air Force. However, the player characters are going to have to act very quickly because the Air Force is going to do something about this very, very soon.
Creeping around an archaeologist's bedroom for clues? No problem, Commander. I have way more bedroom snooping experience than you could possibly imagine. I mean, that's like 80% of what a Call of Cthulhu investigator even does. And I can raid an underwear drawer like nobody's business.
In the hut, we get a lot of information, but only one of which is done in handout form. Keepers, I suggest that you copy and hand out the rest of the information in the module as they search, because there is a lot to uncover here, and I'm a bigger fan of handing my players something that they can look at over just telling them about what they can see, because I feel if they look at it, they can be able to start pointing to the different connections between things on their own, rather than having to have it be told to them. Once the player characters report back, the commander is going to be gearing up for a massive assault to take back this dig site, and that's going to be led by Captain Lofting. The Air Force is going to send a few biplanes for support, but the team itself is going to consist of 3 armored Rolls-Royces and a few trucks to follow behind them in order to carry home any survivors.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Did you just say that we're going to do an assault in armored Rolls-Royces? Oh my God, guys, this might be the best game ever.
The investigators are going to be issued army helmets as well as weapons, and the module gives us stats for the different weapons that are used in this module. There is a spare Vickers machine gun if the player characters want to, call for that and take that with them. But for my game, I also added 2 optional Lewis guns and 2 Bergman submachine guns to any investigator that might want them, because maybe they would have the submachine gun skill, or maybe they'd want to carry around more of a personally sized machine gun. The module gives us some great information on the armored cars, and for my game, I split the player characters between 2 of these 3 cars. One of them was in the command car with the captain, and luckily enough that character was also a very proficient driver, though he wasn't going to be driving the armored car yet. The rest of the PCs I put in the second car, and Keepers, this is where you really want to divide the group up based off what their different strengths are, especially among driving and shooting, because once the battle starts, they're going to need these specific skills more than most. Along the drive to the site, which is going to take several hours, have the soldiers in each car be pretty friendly with the player characters, answering questions as to the operation of these armored cars and these machine guns and what it's like to shoot a machine gun from a turret. And if the player characters ask, definitely give them more information and maybe offer to let them practice a bit. A few times that the caravan has to stop as they're getting different messages that the planes are dropping down on them. Let the PCs squeeze off a few rounds and maybe get a little bit of machine gun skill before the battle, because once again, they're going to need it. Now, Keepers, please remember this entire time that the player characters are not supposed to be taking any sort of active role in the assault. The military is looking at them as civilians that are coming along as, merely consultants for this expedition, but they're not actually expecting them to be, driving these cars or shooting the machine guns, but we all know what's going to happen. Once the group arrives, the battle is going to begin. Now, what's happened here is that Professor Pal has been messing with all sorts of powers that he doesn't quite understand, and he's inadvertently opened opened up a portal to Yugoth, which brought forth several Migo. The Migo then removed the brains of all the people, all the archaeologists and the soldiers and the workers that were at the dig site, and threw them through magic and weird science. Those brains are now controlling the machine guns, rifles, and a mortar that's all protecting the dig site. This means that since there's no physical bodies that's operating these machine guns and rifles and everything, fighting these nests is going to be a little bit weird for the player characters because there's nobody there to shoot. They actually have to disable the devices in order to stop them from firing. Now, once the actual combat starts, keepers quickly take out several of the soldiers, specifically take out the drivers for any cars that you have some good driving PCs in, and take out the machine gunners from some of the other vehicles, or allow the PCs to take over those machine guns, pull the soldier's body out of the way and kind of crawl up into that turret and start firing. This is why I do recommend that you divide up your group depending on what their skills are. That way, if you've got two really good drivers in the group, you might want to put them in two separate cars. That way you don't have one player that's a really great driver and then the other great driver is just kind of sitting next to him going, man, I wish I could be driving this thing. This combat is going to be difficult. It's extremely brutal, but also wildly exciting. And while you want to keep the NPC soldiers as definitely active, they should be in the background. Let the players see what they're doing, but let the players also focus more on what it is that they are doing. If this fight begins overwhelming the player characters, you could give them a little bit of help by having one of the RAF pilots that's flying overhead drop a grenade or a bomb into one of the nests and take that thing out, because there are a lot of soldiers here, so the PCs shouldn't feel that they're totally alone. There should be support going on from the other soldiers, but keepers, let the PCs do most of it, but if they're getting a little overwhelmed, that's what you've got all these NPC soldiers to help them out with. Now, speaking of the planes are going to be busy this whole time dogfighting several Migo. They're going to come flying up out of the temple. So periodically during this entire combat, you should have planes suddenly come crashing down from the sky and exploding in these giant fireballs of black smoke and mushroom clouds. There are a lot of moving parts in this combat, so definitely be ready for this because you've got the cars and they've got 18 armor that's going to be surrounding the PCs inside of it. You can really lay down on them with the machine gun fire because it's very unlikely you're actually going to hurt any of them, but it does make them really afraid as the car is going ding, 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 ding as all the machine guns are hitting it. And the mortars can definitely hurt the PCs. So you have mortars exploding all around them, and it leads to a lot of fun, but the PCs really aren't in as much danger as they might think they are. However, at some point in the fight, the Dark Young that's inside the temple is going to come rising up, and the player characters are going to be able to get a few shots at it before it goes ducking back down to the temple, because then the PCs will have to go in order to face it. But between that and the Migo and these weapons that all seem to be firing themselves, this fight is going to be exceptionally brutal on the player character's sanity. Eventually, the player characters are going to take out enough nests and be able to enter the temple, and that's when they're going to see all the horrors of everything that happened inside with the expedition team that was there. And then between fighting the Dark Young that's in the courtyard and several of the Migo, they're also going to have to shut off this gate. And finding the answers in order to shut off the gate, and as far as what exactly happened, they're going to have to search around and find a lot of clues.
We really enjoyed this pod. It's grotesque and weird and really drove home the horror while also being action-packed.
Once the portal is down, they can finally enter the last two rooms of the temple, fight the Migo leader that's still here, and then maybe rescue two survivors. Now at this point, the adventure is done, and what happens next is really up to you and your players. The British government is going to pay the player characters off, kind of silence this whole thing up and act like nothing ever happened.
Look, the only payment that I want is one of those Rolls-Royce tanks for myself. I got reasons.
Overall, we had a lot of fun with this adventure, but in my opinion, it is just too much combat for any regular Call of Cthulhu character to enjoy, but that's why I say it is absolutely perfect for Pulp Cthulhu, and I highly recommend it for Pulp Cthulhu. Normally when I'm converting a Call of Cthulhu scenario to run that with the Pulp rules, it requires that I have to beef up the opponents a little bit, make them a little bit tougher, maybe increase the numbers of them. But however, for this one, the only thing that I did is I gave a bit of a Pulp treatment to the final Migo bad guy, increased his hit points, gave him the different luck abilities and the talents and all that, but that really wasn't necessary, and I didn't have to make any other changes to the rest of the module because it is already hard enough. Really, the only recommendation that I have is to improve the setup for it. Personally, I prefer the idea that Professor Pal is somebody that the player characters know and that maybe that they have met before in some other adventure, or somebody that they've done correspondences with, especially if they do anything involving the British Museum prior to this adventure, you could have them meet Pal and sort of befriend him. And that makes it less of a case of them going in to find some random NPC that they've never met before, but it makes it now a trusted and beloved friend for not just the player characters, but the players themselves, if this has been a repeat character from before.
My big recommendation here is to keep the armored assault scene as lively as possible. Maybe add 1 or 2 more armored cars, and maybe 1 or 2 more enemy machine gun nests. That way the NPC soldiers could be taking out the NPC machine gun nests, and that's just some background stuff that's going on while the player characters are taking care of whatever objective it is that they have, such as they are taking care of these 2 nests, and everything else going on behind them is just going on behind them, and they are the stars of their own show with whatever their objective happens to be. Also, if you have a player character that happens to be a pilot, come up with a great excuse to stick him up in one of the planes, and then you could have the pilot of that plane get taken out, and the PC has to take charge of the controls, maybe fire the machine guns and dogfight with the Migo, because that would be pretty awesome. The other thing to keep in mind is if the player characters have too easy of a time with the fight, that way you could then use those fights going on in the background as something they can now get involved in. Like when the Migos start taking over the tank and now it's shooting at the other tanks and running soldiers over, and the player characters now have to go and take out that tank. Or maybe one of the planes goes down and the pilot's staggering around in the open and he's getting shot at by one of the machine gun nests, and now the player characters have to race and get their car in the way, and they're like, get in, get in, get in, get out of there. So that could be a lot of fun and add to a lot of excitement. So just add a lot more stuff going on, but keep in mind the player characters should be the stars of whatever the player characters are trying to do.
So in conclusion, Armored Angels was an absolute blast for my players and I, and if you are looking for a pulpy, action-packed adventure that rides that narrow line between cosmic horror and military horror, I suggest that you give it a look.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our stuff, such as game reviews or RPG philosophy, just hit that subscribe button. Till next time, gamers, you have a great day. You know, Arkham PD is really unhappy about me driving my armored Rolls Royce around now. Yeah, they're passing all sorts of ordinances just to keep me off the street. I swear, you run over one car at the Taco Bell drive-in and they get all bent out of shape.